Hello, I am Fatima Razana. This is my Node.js Masterclass homework assignment number 2. This is an API for a pizza delivery company. In this code base, specs gives all the functionalities of this API. README has the documentation of this API. Index.js is the base of this application. Lib contains all the Node.js modules. HTTPS contains configuration for HTTPS server. Data stores records related to the API CRUD functionalities. Logs stores log files related to background workers. So index.js has the base of this application. It requires server module and workers module. Instantiate app. App.init function invokes server.init, which starts the server, and workers.init, which starts the background workers. Invoke app.init, export app module. So this is a REST-based API. This API always return responses in JSON format. The configuration file contains application configuration details. This API integrated with a Stripe account for payment handling and Mailgun email service for delivering emails. Mm, Const environments object has two environments, staging and production. Here, these are the staging environment settings. Include hashing tag here, and you need to have a Stripe account and get the API key and insert here, and Mailgun account API details under Mailgun settings. Based on the selected environment, load the current environment configuration settings and export environment as a module. Data.js has the file system handling functions. In uh, this module handles creating JSON files in .data directory, reading, updating and deleting those files. Uh, First, it requires a Node.js module and helpers module. Helpers module is a module which has all the common functions or helper functions of this application. Instantiate lib module. Lib.base directory gets the path of this .data directory. Lib.create function takes directory name, file name, and data as parameters and returns a callback function. This function create a new JSON file in a given directory and write data into the new file. Open this JSON file in write permission, convert data into JSON string, write to file and close the file, return callback. Lib.read function takes directory name and file name as parameters and returns a callback function. This function reads data from a JSON file in a given directory. Read file UTF decoding and return data as object. Convert JSON string data into an object. For this, we use helpers pass JSON to object function. Callback function returns uh, JSON file data. Lib.update update data in an existing JSON file. It takes directory name, file name, and new data and returns a callback function. Open JSON file with r plus flag, which opens hidden files. Convert new data to JSON string. Overwrite the file with new data and return callback false. Delete lib.delete function deletes a file in a given directory, which takes directory name and file name as arguments and returns a callback. Unlink file from the file system, and if there is an error, callback error, otherwise true. Lib.list lists down all the file names in a given directory. It takes directory name as argument and returns a callback function. fs.readdir reads the directory and takes all the file names. Remove the file extension, push that file name to an empty array and return that array. Lib module export lib module. Helpers module has common functionalities. In this module, crypto HTTP query string node modules are required, and config module is imported. Instantiate helpers module object, and helpers.hash function converts a string into hash. Uh, it takes the string, use crypto Node.js module and create SHA-256 hash code and return that hash code. If there is no string, then return false. Helpers.passJSON to object function pass a JSON string to an object, takes string argument and return JSON dot pass of JSON dot pass. If there's an error, it will return an empty object. Helpers dot generate random string generate a random string for a given length of characters. It takes the length of string. This possible chars gives a possible characters that could go into the string. Generate this random string and return this string value. If there is an error, return false. Validate email address function validates an email address. It uses the pattern for email validation, regex, and return a boolean value. Next function, object to query string. This function convert an object to a URL query string. It uses a prefix. For this prefix, it adds the URL string query parameters. Return query string parameters. Helpers.get get helpers.get stripe tokens. This function fetch a token object from Stripe for a card. This API is integrated with Stripe API for payment handling. First, Stripe account needs to get a token object. For this, function is used. It takes name, number, CVC, expire month, and expire year, and returns a callback function. If all of these fields are valid, create a payload. This payload includes card number, expire month, year, and CVC number. Convert this payload object to a query string using helpers object to query string function, which is this function. Next, request details. Uh, Use HTTPS protocol and call Stripe base URL, the hostname, method post and path v1 slash tokens, and here uh, insert Stripe API key or Stripe secret, and in headers pass this payload as a form URL encoded data. Next, send this request using HTTPS. HTTPS request options are the request parameters, and response is the response returned from Stripe API. Get the status code and set the encoding to UTF-8. If status code is 200 or 201, bind bind to data event and get the response data. Convert this response data into an object. Return response data. If it is not status code 200 or 201, return error. Request.onError binds error of this HTTPS request. Add payload and end request. Helpers function has another function for Stripe payment handling. Previous one was creating a Stripe token account, Stripe token object. Helpers.do Stripe payment process payment by creating a Stripe charge object. For this, uh, need to add parameters token, email, name, number, CVC, expire month, expire year, and the amount. It returns a callback function. Token is the object that we took from previous function or get stripe token. Construct payload. Payload contains amount, currency, source, is the token, and the description, this amount multiplied by 100 because Stripe amount calculates 100 cents to charge $1. Convert this payload into a JSON string. Construct request object. Request object is same Stripe API URL, and request goes to v1 slash charges path, add Stripe API key and headers. Send HTTPS request with this request details and response. Get the status code and set the encoding to UTF-8. If status 200 or 201, listen to data event and collect response data. This response is a JSON or JSON string. Convert this JSON string into an object using helpers.pass.json to object function. Callback response data. Add request, payload, and finally end request. Process Stripe payment function takes email, name, number, CVC, expire month, expire and amount, and returns a callback function. First, do a sanity check on these parameters. If all of these parameters are there, then create a Stripe token. Get that token object. From this token object, retrieve to ID. Use that ID as a token to do Stripe payment. That is to create a Stripe charge object. If success, return charge object, otherwise return error. Send email function send the order receipt to the user via email using Mailgun email service. You need to include this function takes user's email address, receipt number, first name, last name, amount, items, and returns a callback function. First, do a sanity check. Then, if all of these details, if all of these parameters correct, call helpers.compose htm receipt function. Construct payload. Convert this payload to a JSON string. Construct the request details. Here HTTPS protocol, Mailgun base URL, hostname, post, and the path, API key, and headers. Send this HTTPS request to Mailgun API, return response, get the status code, collect response data, convert this response data into an object, and return response data. Write payload to the request and end request. Compose HTML receipt. HTML template for this receipt. It has header part of the email receipt and the begin body, the HTML syntax and some CSS, and return this HTML receipt. Finally, export helpers object as a module. Server.js initiates initiate HTTP and HTTPS server module. This has HTTPS, HTTP path, URLFS, util, string decoder, Node.js modules, and this application config handlers helpers and module. Instantiate server module. Const HTTPS options gets HTTPS configuration details. HTTPS configuration details of key and certification. Server.http function creates an HTTP server and calls server.unified server with request and response. HTTPS server instantiate the HTTPS server. Server.unified server takes request and returns a response. From request URL, grab path name and query. From path name, trim the path, remove /, get method from request and headers from request. Const decoder creates a new string decoder with UTF-8. Request.onData binds event data and decode the incoming request and get the request data from the API calls routers. If router is defined, call server.routers, otherwise call handlers not found function. Chosen handler function takes data. This is the request parameter. This is the incoming data, trimmed path, method, headers, query string, and payload for processing the request. It returns a callback function with status code and a response payload. Status code is a number, then return status code, if not default to 200. Payload, if type of payload is an object, return payload, otherwise return empty object. Convert this payload into a JSON string. Set response headers to application JSON and write status code response state write response status code and write a response payload. If status code is 200, print the result in console with green color, otherwise print it in red color. Here server.routes has all the API calls. Server.init invokes HTTP server and HTTPS server. Export server object as a module. So let's see how these API calls work. When a request comes to API/users, it calls handlers.users function from handlers module. Call creates a new user. When a request comes to API users, it calls handlers module users function. Handlers module handle all the API request routes. It requires data and helpers module. Const handlers instantiate handlers module. Handlers.users request for post, put, get, and delete method. Based on the request method, select the relevant function. If there's an error, return 405 error, which is method not allowed. This API allows to create, delete, read, and update a user object. User post request creates a new user with uh, parameters first name, last name, email, address, city, state, postal code, and password. All of these parameters are required. From data payload, extract all of these parameters, do a sanity check. If all parameters available, first check whether user exists in the given directory, that is under data.data folder users directory with the given email. If user does not exist, get the password, call helpers.hash function to create a hash of the password. Create user object and call create function of data module to create a new user record with given user details. If success, return 200, otherwise return 500. Could not create a new user. Let's see this in Postman. Post localhost 3000 API users with request data, content type application. First we'll start this API Node.js application index.js server running on port 3000 and HTTPS server running on port 3001. token get method retrieves a token details. For this, we need to pass token ID as query string. Retrieve ID from query string. Check ID. If ID present, retrieve token data and return token data. So in Postman, we can send a GET request to API token. You can see response data. Token update calls put method. Handlers tokens put method is used to extend token expiration time. To extend token expiration time, the token should not be expired. First, from data payload, get ID and extend. Extend is a Boolean value. Both fields are required. Do a sanity check. If ID and extend are there, read token data. If token expires greater than the current time, update token, return 200, otherwise return 500. Token expiration for this. API tokens put method request payload API token ID and extend true response 200. That's token put method. Tokens delete method deletes a token. For this, it requires to send the ID in query string parameter. If ID there, check for the token which matches the given ID. If available, delete the token and return 200. Otherwise, return 500. Delete, click send. You can see 200 message. Token deleted. The new token is not available here. Finally, this token object has another function to verify a given token is currently valid for a given user. It takes ID and email parameters and returns a callback function. First, look up for the token which matches the given ID. If available, check for the email and expiration time. If both true, callback true, otherwise callback false. That is API tokens, API call functions. API menu request calls handlers menu. Handlers menu function handles only get method. It returns a list of items from menu directory pizza.json file. So the request can localhost API menu get request send. Here you can see the response, a list of items object array. Next API call API items. This API request handle item requests. It calls handlers items function. Handlers items only serve for GET request. It requires to pass item ID as query string parameter. Get the item ID. If item ID there, get menu list. From this menu list, retrieve the item and return item data. API call API items. It's localhost API items ID 1005. It returns response. If I enter different ID, you can see different data. If I another ID, it says could not find the specified item, error. Okay. Next one, API cards calls handlers cards function. Handlers cards request calls except only post, put and get method. I- Cards request for post method requires items field. It's an array of item objects. If items available, get the token from headers. Look look up for the token which matches the given ID, and if available and if it is a valid token, then create a new cart record. This cart record contains the cart ID, email, items, and total. Let's see API cards request. Cards post request will test in Postman. API cards post request send items array of object. Each item has attributes name, pan, price, and quantity. Send a new cart created successfully. It returns status code 200. You can check that here under .data cards folder, new record, ID, name, and items. And total. That is API cards post request. API cards get method returns cart details. It requires cart ID in a query string. Retrieve query string object ID parameter. validate ID parameter. If ID correct, look up for the card which matches the given ID. Read cards data, get card data and retrieve email, get the token from headers and validate token. If it is a valid token, return card data. Otherwise, return error. Let's see cards request get method in Postman, headers, token and send. You can see cart details, cart ID, total and cart items. API cards put method updates the shopping cart. It requires cart ID and items. Get cart ID, validate, look up for the cart which matches the given cart ID, get token from headers, validate token, update cart details for valid token, otherwise return error. Carts put method, remove one item from this existing cart and send. You can see success 200 message. Let's see that in directory carts. Now there is only one item. API orders request handles orders submissions. Handlers orders function accepts only post and get methods. Post method data payload requires cart ID, card name, card number, card CVC, card expire month and card expire year. Retrieve these from data.payload. First do sanity check. Then if all variables available, if all parameters there, then look up for the matching card. Validate token. If it is valid, create order. Helpers.generate random string creates order ID. This order receipt parameter has three states: pending, sent and failed. Payment parameter has three states: pending, succeeded and failed. Create order record. Update users order list in users record. Next, pay for the order by calling helpers.sendPayment, which handles Stripe payment. If payment success, update orders payment to succeeded and insert charge ID to orders data. Then send email receipt by calling helpers send email function. If success, update orders receipt to sent and delivered ID, update order records. If any errors, send callback error 500. If order failed, order data receipt parameter set to failed. And if payment failed, order data payment field set to failed and update orders records. Let's see orders post request in Postman. Postman request sending to API orders, post request, headers, token, cart ID, card name, CVC, expire month and year in a request body. Click send. Error email service failed to send the order receipt because I have used a fake email here. If you see orders record, new order created for this user, but the email is fake, that's why it's not sending the receipt. I have tested this API order request with a valid email. This is the order receipt email. And final function handlers orders get request. It retrieves an order record. It requires order ID in query string object. If ID there, read data from orders folder and retrieve order data and verify token. If it is valid, return order data. Otherwise, return false. Orders get request, send. You can see order details for the cart ID, this email, payment failed and payment succeeded and receipt failed. Handlers order function. Handlers not found returns callback 404 and handlers ping callback 200. Export handlers module. Those are the API calls in this pizza delivery API service. In this Node.js application, the background workers gather order details of failed payments and failed email receipt and create logs. Logs.js file is the library that handles logs. It stores log and creates log rotation. First, it has Node.js modules, instantiate lib module, and get the base directory of .logs folder. Lib.append append a string to a file. If there is no file, it creates a new file. Open file, append new data as a JSON string. Close file, and if there is an error, return callback function with error. Lib.list list all the logs, and optionally it includes a compressed logs. It reads base directory data .logs folder. Lib.compress compress the content of one log file into a compressed format .gz b64 format. Lib.decompress function decompress the content of a .gz file into a string variable, and lib.truncate uh, updates the existing log file with new record. Finally, export lib as a module. Workers.js file has all the Node.js module, instantiate workers module. First, it look up for all orders and perform a order check. In order check, get all order details, do a sanity check. If all checks pass the data along to the next step in the process. If payment failed or receipt failed, read relevant card data, get card data, and log these details to a log file. For that, it calls workers.log function. Workers.log function takes order details and card data, create log data, convert this log data to a JSON string, and append this log string to a log file. Create log file with order ID as file name. Workers.loop function execute worker process once per every hour. Workers.rotate logs rotate the log files. It lists down all the uh, non-compressed log files and compress the data to a different file. Workers.log rotations loop calls workers.rotate logs to rotate logs process once per day. Workers.init function, this line of code prints on the console to make sure running. Call workers.gather all orders, call workers.loop, then call for rotate logs and log rotation loop functions. Export workers module. You can see under logs, log files are created. One thing I forgot to explain, that is users API calls, put, get and delete methods. Put method requires email address and other fields are optional. If email there, Get the token from headers, verify token. If it is valid, update user data with new data. So API call, API users put method. Here I am changing user name. 200. Okay, you can see users data updated. Users get request, read user data from user records. For this, user email required as query string. If user email correct, retrieve token. If token valid, look up for user who matches that email and return data. When you return data, we delete user's hash password. API call, API users email query string get request. It gives user data. Last one, users delete method. It requires email as query string. If email there, first verify token. If it is valid, delete user record and delete all records related to users orders and users cart. Get users orders record, loop through all orders, delete order record and relevant cart record. If success, return callback 200, otherwise return false. So delete request, can send delete, can see 200 OK. If you check user folder, the user record delete. README file has the complete documentation of this API. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching this video.